For privacy reasons, names and places have been changed. This story is inspired by true events.
On a crisp autumn morning in March 1995, experienced hikers Elena Morales and Diego Herrera set out to conquer the legendary Torres del Paine circuit in Chilean Patagonia. The adventurous couple, both seasoned outdoor enthusiasts from Santiago, were completing a challenging route few tourists dared to attempt. They never reached their next checkpoint. Despite an exhaustive search operation led by the Chilean National Police and park rangers who knew the terrain intimately, Elena and Diego seemed to have vanished into the vast Patagonian wilderness. For 20 years, their families lived with crushing uncertainty, while rumors and theories circulated through the hiking community. Then, in 2015, high-altitude climbers made a chilling discovery: a perfectly preserved campsite entombed in ice, containing secrets that would finally reveal the dark truth behind one of Chile's most baffling disappearances. This is the complete investigation into what happened to Elena Morales and Diego Herrera in the shadows of Torres del Paine. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from, and if you enjoy this content, consider liking and subscribing to our channel. Now let's continue. In the crisp autumn of 1995, the rugged peaks of Torres del Paine National Park stood sentinel over two experienced hikers embarking on what should have been a routine circuit of Chile's most iconic wilderness. Elena Morales, a respected veterinarian from Santiago, and her partner Diego Herrera, a veteran park ranger, had meticulously planned their trek through the park's challenging terrain. Their extensive outdoor experience and intimate knowledge of Patagonian wilderness made them ideal candidates for the demanding circuit that lay ahead. The couple had spent months preparing for this particular adventure, carefully selecting their gear and plotting their route through the park's lesser-traveled sections. Elena's colleagues at the veterinary clinic recalled her excitement as she discussed the upcoming trip, showing them detailed maps marked with planned camping spots and estimated daily distances. Diego, drawing from his years of experience as a ranger in Chile's national parks, had insisted on carrying additional safety equipment, despite the extra weight it would add to their packs. On September 15, 1995, Elena and Diego signed the park's registration book at the main ranger station. Their permit detailed an ambitious but achievable itinerary along the full circuit, including several days on the remote backside of the Torres Massif. The last photograph taken of them shows the couple standing beside their car in the parking lot, Elena adjusting her red backpack, while Diego checked their GPS coordinates one final time. 3 days into their journey, other hikers reported crossing paths with Elena and Diego near the Gray Glacier checkpoint. The couple appeared to be in high spirits, moving at a steady pace and well within their planned schedule. German tourists who shared a campsite with them that evening would later tell investigators that Elena and Diego seemed particularly interested in reports of an unusual guide they had encountered, though the details of that conversation would not become significant until many years later. The first sign of trouble came 5 days into their trek when Elena and Diego failed to check in at the Italian camp checkpoint. Park protocols required all hikers to register their presence at designated stations, particularly in the more isolated sections of the circuit. The missing check-in, while concerning, was not immediately considered catastrophic. Weather conditions sometimes forced hikers to alter their routes, and the couple's experience suggested they would know how to handle any unexpected challenges. However, as hours stretched into days with no sign of Elena and Diego at subsequent checkpoints, worry began to mount among park staff. Diego's colleagues at the ranger service were particularly concerned. They knew he would never deliberately deviate from protocol without finding some way to communicate his intentions. The weather during this period had been unusually clear, eliminating poor conditions as an obvious explanation for their absence. Captain Pablo Sanchez of the Chilean National Police received the initial missing persons report on September 23rd, 8 days after Alina and Diego had begun their hike. The report noted that the couple had packed supplies for 10 days, meaning their rays, or says, would soon be depleted if they hadn't already reached them. Their families in Santiago were notified, and within hours, the first search teams were mobilizing at the park headquarters. The last verified sighting of Alina and Diego came from a British hiking group who remembered passing them on the trail leading toward the back circuit. The British hikers recalled a brief exchange about trail conditions and mentioned that Alina had been photographing unusual rock formations. This encounter occurred in the late afternoon of September 18th, just before the couple entered one of the most remote sections of the circuit. After that moment, Alina Morales and Diego Herrera simply vanished into the vast Patagonian wilderness, leaving no trace of their passage through the mountains they both knew so well. As the sun set over Torres del Paine that evening, no one could have predicted that this disappearance would launch one of Chile's most puzzling wilderness mysteries, one that would remain unsolved for 2 decades, until a shocking discovery high in the frozen peaks would finally reveal the terrible truth about what happened to Alina and Diego on that autumn trek. The first rays of morning sun cast long shadows across Torres del Paine's rugged terrain as Captain Pablo Sanchez surveyed the massive search area from the park's Emergency Operations Center. With 20 years of experience in mountain rescue operations, he knew the critical importance of the first 48 hours in any wilderness disappearance. The weather had been unusually cooperative, with clear skies and moderate temperatures, but this small advantage was overshadowed by the sheer scale of the territory they needed to cover. 3 helicopter teams began systematic sweeps of the circuit's back section, while ground teams, comprised of park rangers and specialized mountain rescue units, established a grid pattern working outward from Alina and Diego's last known position. The British hiking group's report placed them on the trail leading to the remote southern passage, but beyond that point, the possibilities multiplied exponentially. Dr. Maria Vasquez, newly assigned to the case from Santiago's investigative unit, focused on interviewing every hiker who had been on the circuit during the relevant time frame. The German tourist's account of Alina and Diego's interest in an unusual guide caught her attention, but initial attempts to identify this individual proved frustrating. The park's guide registration system in 1995 was still largely paper-based, making quick cross-referencing nearly impossible. Search teams faced brutal conditions as they pushed into higher elevations. Windswept ridges and deep ravines demanded careful inspection, while loose scree slopes threatened to give way under the searchers' feet. Each team carried sophisticated GPS equipment, marking and documenting every possible sign of human passage, but the harsh Patagonian environment had already begun erasing whatever trail Alina and Diego might have left. Alina's sister arrived from Santiago on the 4th day of the search, bringing with her detailed lists of the couple's equipment and supplies. Every item was methodically cataloged: a forest green North Face tent, 2 red Osprey backpacks, matching black Gore-Tex jackets, and Diego's distinctive yellow safety whistle, which he always wore on a lanyard around his neck. These descriptions were immediately distributed to all search teams, but the items' common earth tones made spotting them from the air particularly challenging. Captain Sanchez's concern deepened as they recovered the first piece of physical evidence: a single hiking pole, matched to the brand and model Alina had purchased for the trip, found near a stream crossing several kilometers off their planned route. The location made little sense given their intended path, and forensic analysis of the pole revealed no additional clues about their fate. By the end of the first week, search patterns had expanded to include possible alternate routes the couple might have taken to escape bad weather or other hazards. Sanchez ordered detailed searches of every emergency shelter and ranger station within a 20-kilometer radius of their last known position. Each location told the same story: no sign of Alina and Diego. The investigation took an intriguing turn when Fernando Torres, analyzing park entry records, discovered several inconsistencies in the guide registrations. From the weeks surrounding the disappearance, 3 different hiking groups had reported encounters with unauthorized guides operating in the park's southern section, but descriptions varied widely, and no official action had been taken at the time. As the search entered its second week, deteriorating weather conditions began to hamper operations. Low clouds and driving rain reduced visibility to mere meters, grounding the helicopter teams and forcing ground searches to focus on smaller, more manageable areas. The weather seemed to mock their efforts, erasing footprints and washing away any signs that might have led them to the missing couple. Diego's colleagues in the Ranger Service were particularly affected by the lack of progress. They knew his protocols, his habits, his exceptional wilderness skills. The fact that he had left no discernible trail, no sign of an emergency camp, no marker that other rangers would recognize, suggested something far more troubling than a simple hiking accident. By the time the initial search operation was scaled back, more than 200 people had been involved in the effort to find Elena and Diego. They had covered thousands of hectares of wilderness, documented hundreds of potential leads, and interviewed dozens of witnesses. Yet the mountains held their secret, refusing to yield any meaningful clues about what had happened to the experienced couple who had ventured into their depths that autumn day. As autumn faded into winter, the massive search operation for Elena Morales and Diego Herrera gradually contracted. The harsh Patagonian weather had taken its toll, not only on the searchers, but on any remaining evidence that might have pointed to the couple's fate. Captain Pablo Sanchez found himself making the hardest decision of his career, scaling back the active search to periodic sweeps and focused investigations of new leads. The family struggled to accept this transition. Elena's sister spent hours at the park headquarters, poring over maps and suggesting new areas to search, while Diego's parents pressed for continued helicopter operations despite the deteriorating weather conditions. Their pain was palpable, their hope still burning even as the practical possibilities dimmed. Dr. Maria Vasquez took charge of the case file as it transitioned to the cold case unit. Her office in Santiago became a repository for every scrap of information about the disappearance. Photographs of Elena and Diego's equipment, witness statements, weather reports, and search grid documentation filled dozens of folders. She was particularly troubled by the German tourist's account of the mysterious guide, but without more specific details, this lead remained frustratingly vague. Throughout the winter of 1995 and into 1996, sporadic reports trickled in from hikers and climbers in Torres del Paine. Each potential sighting or discovered item required investigation, but none provided the breakthrough they desperately sought. A yellow fabric scrap that matched Diego's rain jacket turned out to be from an unrelated camping accident. A weathered backpack strap found near Grey Glacier was eventually traced to a Brazilian tourist who had lost it months before Elena and Diego disappeared. The case began to impact the wider hiking community in Torres del Paine. Solo hikers and couples became more hesitant to attempt the full circuit, particularly the remote southern section where Elena and Diego had vanished. The Park Service implemented stricter check-in protocols and mandatory emergency beacon requirements, changes that Diego himself would have appreciated as a ranger. Fernando Torres, the Park Service investigator, refused to let the case rest entirely. In his spare time, he meticulously documented every unauthorized guide report from 1990 to 1996, creating a detailed timeline of suspicious activity in the park. His work revealed a pattern of incidents during the shoulder seasons, spring and autumn, when visitor numbers were lower, but conditions were still favorable for hiking. As months turned into years, the case file gathered dust in Dr. Vasquez's office, but never quite disappeared from her mind. She regularly reviewed the evidence, hoping fresh eyes or new forensic techniques might reveal something previously overlooked. The couple's professional backgrounds nagged at her. How could a veteran park ranger and an experienced hiker vanish so completely, leaving barely a trace? By the fifth anniversary of their disappearance, the case had become something of a legend among Chilean park rangers. New recruits learned about Diego and Alina during their training, their story serving as both a cautionary tale and a reminder of the mountain's unforgiving nature. The mystery deepened the already profound respect for Torres del Paine's wilderness, while also hinting at darker possibilities that no one wanted to contemplate. The families never gave up hope, but they learned to live with uncertainty. They established a small scholarship in Alina and Diego's names, supporting veterinary students and aspiring park rangers who shared the couple's passion for wildlife and conservation. Each year, they would make a pilgrimage to Torres del Paine, walking the early sections of the circuit and leaving flowers at the last checkpoint where their loved ones had been seen. A decade passed, and then another. New cases demanded attention. New tragedies unfolded in the park, but Alina and Diego's disappearance remained uniquely puzzling. The complete absence of definitive evidence suggested either extraordinary circumstances or deliberate concealment. Dr. Vasquez found herself returning to the case file with increasing frequency, convinced that something in those early reports held the key to understanding what had happened on the circuit in September 1995. No one could have predicted that the mountains would hold their secret for 20 years, or that when the truth finally emerged, it would be more disturbing than any of the theories proposed during those long years of waiting and wondering. The answers lay frozen in time, preserved by the very elements that had frustrated the initial search, waiting to be discovered by climbers who had no idea they were about to unlock one of Chile's most enduring wilderness mysteries. In the harsh winter of 2015, a discovery high in the peaks of Torres del Paine would shatter 2 decades of silence. 3 professional climbers, attempting a technical route on the lesser-visited eastern face, encountered an anomaly that caught their attention. A patch of colored fabric protruding from a sheet of ice nearly 40 meters up the rock face. What they found preserved in that frozen tableau would send shockwaves through Chile's climbing community. There, perfectly entombed in crystalline ice, lay an intact campsite that had clearly been abandoned in haste. A forest green north face tent, its fabric still taut despite years of exposure, remained partially erected. 2 red osprey backpacks sat propped against the tent's entrance, their contents frozen solid. The climbers immediately recognized the significance of their discovery. The location, while not on any standard route, offered a natural shelter beneath an overhanging rock face. It was exactly the kind of spot experienced hikers like Alina and Diego might have chosen for an emergency bivouac. The team carefully documented their find with photographs before descending to alert authorities. When Captain Sanchez, now nearing retirement, received the call, he immediately recognized the equipment descriptions from the 20-year-old case file. Within hours, a specialized recovery team was mobilizing, equipped with ice-cutting tools and forensic collection gear. The delicate process of extracting evidence from the frozen campsite would take nearly a week. The preservation was remarkable. The extreme cold and dry conditions had effectively created a time capsule. Personal items emerged from the ice in near-perfect condition. Clothing, cooking equipment, maps marked with careful annotations in Alina's distinctive handwriting. But the most significant find lay wrapped in a waterproof stuffed sack, Alina's diary, its pages still crisp and legible. Dr. Maria Vasquez, who had never truly let go of the case, flew immediately to the site. As she began reading Alina's final entries, the true horror of what had transpired on the mountain slowly emerged. The diary detailed increasing paranoia about a guide who had been following them for several days. Alina described him as aggressive, appearing at odd moments on the trail, asking too many questions about their equipment and schedule. The entries grew more urgent in the days before the campsite's abandonment. Alina wrote about Diego's growing concern that he recognized the guide from incident reports he'd handled as a ranger. The final entry, written in shaky handwriting, described plans to confront the man about his suspicious behavior. Alina had even sketched his face, a detail that would prove crucial to the investigation. As items emerged from the ice, each piece added to the emerging narrative. A broken camera contained undeveloped film that, when carefully processed, revealed images of the couple's final days on the trail. In several photos, a blurry figure could be seen in the background, watching from a distance. Diego's ranger notebook contained hurried notes about unauthorized guides operating in the park, including specific dates and locations. The campsite's condition suggested a violent confrontation. The tent showed signs of a struggle-torn fabric, broken poles, and scattered supplies. Most telling was a small bloodstain preserved in the ice near the tent's entrance, its DNA analysis confirming what investigators had begun to suspect. Alina and Diego had not simply disappeared. They had been attacked. Fernando Torres, now heading the park's safety division, coordinated with forensics teams to document every detail of the site. The location itself posed questions. It lay well off the couple's planned route, in an area few hikers ever visited. Had they been herded there deliberately? The terrain surrounding the campsite offered few escape routes, with steep cliffs on 3 sides and a narrow approach trail that could easily be monitored. The diary's final pages painted a picture of mounting dread. Alina described feeling trapped, noting that the mysterious guide seemed to appear on every possible escape route. She had written about Diego's determination to confront him, believing that his authority as a ranger would force the man to back down. The unfinished sentence at the bottom of the last page suggested the confrontation had begun before she could complete her entry. As word of the discovery spread through the climbing community, more pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. Other hikers from that period came forward with similar stories of aggressive encounters with an unauthorized guide. The detailed description in Alina's diary, combined with these new accounts, would finally put investigators on the trail of a killer who had haunted Torres del Paine's remote paths for far too long. The discovery of Alina's diary and the frozen campsite breathed new life into an investigation that had lain dormant for 2 decades. Fernando Torres, now a senior analyst with the Park Service, found himself confronting a past that had haunted his entire career. With the diary's detailed descriptions in hand, he began the painstaking process of reviewing every guide license issued in Torres del Paine during the 1990s. Working from a cramped office overlooking the park's administrative building, Torres methodically cross-referenced names, dates, and locations. The park's record-keeping from 1995 was far from perfect. Loose papers, handwritten logs, and incomplete registration forms filled dozens of dusty boxes. Yet within this bureaucratic maze, patterns began to emerge. Dr. Maria Vasquez arrived from Santiago to assist with the investigation, bringing with her 20 years of cold case experience. She immediately recognized similarities between Alina and Diego's case and several other incidents that had occurred in the park during the same period. 3 hikers had reported equipment theft in the spring of 1995. 2 couples had cut their treks short after uncomfortable encounters with an aggressive guide. A German backpacker had vanished entirely, though his case had never been connected to Alina and Diego's disappearance. The breakthrough came when Torres discovered a series of complaints filed against a guide named Raul Figueroa. The reports described a man who often operated without proper permits, who seemed to appear and disappear on remote sections of the circuit at will. His name surfaced repeatedly in incident reports, though never with enough evidence to warrant serious investigation. Examining Figueroa's background revealed a troubling history. He had worked officially as a guide in the early 1990s before his license was revoked for aggressive behavior toward clients. Instead of leaving the park, he had simply continued operating illegally, using his intimate knowledge of the terrain to evade detection. The physical description in the old complaints matched Alina's diary entries with chilling accuracy: tall, weather-beaten face, distinctive scar above his right eye. Dr. Vasque Hughes began building a psychological profile of Figueroa. He targeted isolated hikers and couples, showing particular interest in those carrying expensive equipment. His pattern was to follow groups for several days, learning their routines and vulnerabilities. The diary's description of his behavior matched this profile perfectly: the constant surveillance, the strategic appearances on the trail, the gradual escalation of threatening behavior. Diego's ranger credentials had likely sealed their fate. As an experienced park ranger, he would have recognized Figueroa from incident reports and understood the broader pattern of criminal activity. This realization transformed what might have been a simple robbery into something far more desperate. Figueroa couldn't risk being exposed, not after years of operating with impunity in the park's remote sections. Torres and Dr. Vasquez worked with satellite imagery experts to analyze the terrain around the frozen campsite. The location suggested careful planning. It was virtually invisible from the main trail, but offered clear views of anyone approaching. Perfect for an ambush. The surrounding cliffs and ravines would have made it easy to dispose of evidence, including bodies. The investigation team began discreet inquiries into Figueroa's current whereabouts. He had maintained a low profile in recent years, but never strayed far from Torres del Paine. Local residents reported occasional sightings of him in small towns near the park, living under various aliases but always keeping to himself. As evidence mounted, Dr. Vasquez coordinated with Captain Sanchez to build a case against Figueroa. Alina's diary provided the crucial link between past and present, its detailed descriptions matching not only Figueroa's appearance but his documented pattern of behavior. The frozen campsite had preserved physical evidence that would have otherwise been lost to time and weather. 20 years after Alina and Diego vanished into the Patagonian wilderness, investigators finally had what they needed: a name, a face, and enough evidence to move against a predator who had turned Torres del Paine's majestic landscapes into his private hunting ground. The mountain that had kept their secret for so long had finally begun to speak, and justice, though long delayed, was about to be served. On a cold morning in June 2015, Raul Figueroa's past finally caught up with him. The former guide, now 67 years old, had settled into a quiet routine in the small town of Puerto Natales, living in a weathered house just blocks from the ferry terminal where tourists departed for Torres del Paine. He still watched the hikers with their expensive gear, but age had tempered his predatory instincts to mere observation. The evidence against him had accumulated with devastating precision. Alina's diary provided investigators with details only a killer could have known: the exact route he had used to stalk them, specific conversations he had initiated about their equipment, and most crucially, the confrontation that preceded their deaths. Her final entries painted a portrait of mounting terror, as Figueroa systematically cut off their escape routes, forcing them toward the remote campsite where he would ultimately corner them. When Captain Sanchez's team began surveillance of Figueroa, they discovered a man still haunted by his crimes. He would spend hours staring at the mountains from his porch, drinking mate and muttering to himself. Local shopkeepers reported his odd habit of collecting newspaper clippings about missing hikers, storing them in carefully maintained folders that investigators would later find in his home. Dr. Maria Vasquez's psychological profile proved remarkably accurate. Figueroa had evolved from opportunistic thief to calculated killer, driven by a combination of greed and territorial obsession, with the park he considered his domain. Diego's ranger status had represented a direct threat to this carefully constructed world. The couple's expensive equipment had provided the initial motivation, but their potential to expose his previous crimes had sealed their fate. Fernando Torres' analysis of park records revealed the full extent of Figueroa's activities. Over 15 years, he had been connected to at least 12 serious incidents, ranging from theft to assault. His knowledge of the park's remote areas had allowed him to operate undetected, using the vast wilderness to hide evidence of his crimes. The frozen campsite discovered by climbers was just one of several locations he had used to ambush unsuspecting hikers. The breakthrough in the case came from an unexpected source. A former client of Figueroa's from 1994 recognized his photo in a discreet newspaper inquiry and came forward with crucial information. She described how he had boasted about knowing places in the park where people could disappear forever. Her statement corroborated Alina's diary entries and provided investigators with specific locations to search. Forensic teams, using advanced ground-penetrating radar, began examining the areas around the frozen campsite. The technology revealed what 2 decades of conventional searches had missed: a deep crevasse that showed signs of human intervention. Inside, beneath years of accumulated ice and rock, they found the remains of Alina and Diego, along with pieces of their equipment that matched the detailed descriptions in the original missing persons report. The evidence was overwhelming. Alina's diary entries, perfectly preserved in the ice, provided a detailed timeline of their final days. The forensic evidence from the recovered remains aligned with her account of escalating confrontations with Figueroa. DNA analysis of blood traces found at the campsite matched both victims, while fiber evidence linked directly to clothing still in Figueroa's possession. On a misty morning in Puerto Natales, as Figueroa performed his daily ritual of watching young hikers board buses to the park, Captain Sanchez's team moved in. The arrest was anticlimactic. The once dangerous predator surrendered without resistance, as if he had been waiting for this moment. In his house, investigators found a hidden room filled with stolen equipment dating back to the 1990s, including items belonging to Alina and Diego. During interrogation, Figueroa's carefully maintained facade cracked. He spoke of the couple with a mixture of anger and admiration, describing how Diego's ranger training had made him a particularly challenging target. He admitted to following them for days, studying their movements, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The details matched Alina's diary entries exactly, providing the final confirmation investigators needed to close a case that had haunted them for 20 years. The conviction of Raul Figueroa in late 2015 brought closure to one of Chile's most haunting wilderness mysteries. In a Santiago courtroom packed with park rangers, cold case investigators, and the families of Alina Morales and Diego Herrera, the former guide stood impassive as the judge delivered a life sentence for their murders. His weathered face, so accurately captured in Alina's diary sketches 2 decades earlier, showed no emotion as the verdict was read. The trial revealed the full scope of Figueroa's crimes in Torres del Paine. Prosecutors presented evidence linking him to numerous disappearances and robberies spanning 15 years. Alina's diary proved instrumental, its detailed accounts corroborating the testimony of other victims who had survived encounters with him. The frozen campsite, preserved by nature itself, provided physical evidence that would have otherwise been lost to time. For Captain Pablo Sanchez, who had led the original investigation in 1995, the resolution brought both satisfaction and sadness. Standing outside the courthouse after the verdict, he spoke quietly about the 2 decades of uncertainty that had haunted the families. "The mountains kept their secret for 20 years, he said, but in the end, Alina's own words brought justice for them both. The impact of the case led to sweeping changes in Torres del Paine's security protocols. The Park Service, under Fernando Torres' guidance, implemented rigorous background checks for guides and established a sophisticated tracking system for hikers on remote routes. Emergency beacons became mandatory for all backcountry permits, and ranger patrols were increased in the areas where Figueroa had once operated with impunity. Dr. Maria Vasquez's cold case unit used lessons learned from the investigation to review other unsolved wilderness disappearances across Chile. The discovery of the frozen campsite changed how investigators approached such cases, demonstrating how evidence could survive for decades in the right conditions. Her team developed new protocols for handling high-altitude crime scenes, incorporating techniques during the recovery of Elena and Diego's campsite. The families found a measure of peace in the resolution, though the pain of their loss never fully subsided. Elena's sister established a foundation in their memory, providing safety training for wilderness guides and funding emergency rescue equipment for the Park Service. Diego's former colleagues in the Ranger Service created a memorial at the Visitor Center, ensuring that their story would serve as both a warning and a reminder of the importance of wilderness safety. In a poignant ceremony held at Torres del Paine in 2016, Elena and Diego were finally laid to rest near the mountains they had loved. The service, attended by rangers, investigators, and family members, included the dedication of a new emergency shelter built in their honor. The shelter, positioned along the circuit they had been hiking, now serves as a safe haven for travelers and a quiet place of remembrance. Figueroa's conviction also brought forward others who had encountered him during his years of predation in the park. Their stories painted a picture of a man who had used the vastness of Patagonia to hide his crimes, taking advantage of the isolation and harsh conditions to prey on vulnerable hikers. Each account added to the understanding of how he had operated with impunity for so long. The case fundamentally changed how Torres del Paine approached visitor safety. The park's guide licensing system was completely overhauled, with strict enforcement of credentials and regular background checks. Rangers received additional training in criminal investigation techniques, and new technology was deployed to monitor remote sections of the circuit. Perhaps the most lasting impact of Elena and Diego's case was its influence on wilderness safety culture throughout South America. Their story became a cautionary tale taught in guide certification programs, emphasizing the importance of proper credentials and the potential dangers of isolated encounters on the trail. The discovery of the frozen campsite and Elena's diary transformed a 20-year mystery into a powerful lesson about vigilance and preparation in the wilderness. Today, hikers passing through Torres del Paine see subtle reminders of Elena and Diego's story, the new shelter bearing their names, the enhanced ranger presence on remote trails, the memorial plaque at the Visitor Center. Their tragedy led to changes that have made the park safer for countless others who follow in their footsteps, seeking adventure in one of Earth's most beautiful and challenging landscapes.